Salt sat on the lips of the wind and lapped at the black stone of Dragonstone, as if the whole fortress were a stranded ship, and the sea meant to tow it back. Night had bled down from the sky, until even the jagged gargoyles crouched along the walls seemed to be listening. Davos Seaworth stood on an outer battlement with the gulls and the dark, and he watched the white seam where waves broke upon the rocks. He had stood upon 100 decks and defied 100 storms. Here, with the wind too thin to fill a sail, he felt the unease that came before a choice one did not want to own. Below, where the surf was a constant mutter, the tide dragged kelp like torn banners through chutes cut by the sea, and somewhere in the black, near the boathouses, a lantern swung on its hook like a slow heartbeat. The harbor slept, or feigned sleep. He could smell pitch and wet rope and the iron tang of the tide. Farther up, past the squat drum towers, Dragonstone's courtyard burned with a few torches and a brazier's red glow. Smoke from the kitchens drifted in thin lines, laid flat by the wind. He touched, out of habit, the little pouch at his neck, though the bones it had once held were long gone and the habit a ghost. His missing fingers ached when the air turned damp. They remembered storms, the way old men remembered songs. He flexed the stumps and listened to the sea. The sea gave no counsel. When it did, it was always the same counsel. Keep your head above water. That had been a life once. So simple that it felt like a lie to remember it. Sir Davos? The voice at his back was tentative. Hi. Shireen Baratheon stood in the archway that led from the stair, holding a candle holder too large for her hands. The flame painted her cheeks in warm strokes and left her eyes dark beyond the glitter. She wore a plain gown the color of old smoke, and one lock of black hair had fallen free of its ribbon. Behind her, the stairway curled down into more dark. He turned, knelt a little as he always did so. He would not loom, and smiled the way men do when they wish to reassure children of safety. They cannot command. Princess. It's late for books. I couldn't sleep. Patchface was humming. Under the sea, smoke is a sky, and I thought of chimneys. She made a face and peered past him at the empty night. Are you looking for ships? I was looking for wind, Davos said. The one thing none of us can steal. It's a poor harbor for thieves like me. You're not a thief, she said quickly, with a child's fervor. You smuggled onions when men were starving. That's being good. Onions were my fortune. Fortune makes saints of scoundrels when the hungry do the judging. He softened the words with another smile. And on bad nights, fortune has a sharp edge. She held the candle differently, turning the brass circle at its base, as if she might tighten the flame into something small enough to hide. You saw him, didn't you? The boy. Gendry. Davos looked back to the sea, though nothing there would help him lie. I did. Shireen stepped closer until her shoulder touched the cold lip of the parapet. He's no one. That's what people say. A bastard. But he's someone to himself. He looked frightened at supper. Ben Dawal. He should be, Davos said, because false hopes were a cruelty he did not have the art to wield. He is in a castle of dragons. She did not laugh. She almost never laughed when grown men said something that wished for merriment. Father says he has king's blood, but he has never had a king's supper or a king's shoes. That's the thing about blood, Davos replied. It runs warm whether your boots have gold buckles or holes. A gust came then and salted out the candle. For a heartbeat, there was just the hiss and the smell of tallow. Shireen's small exclamation was swallowed by the sea's breathing below. Davos closed his hand around the wick to guard what wasn't there. When she relit it with a flint from her pocket like a captain rehearsed in small salvations, he shook his head. You should be abed. I thought perhaps you could do what you did before, Shireen said, eyes low, words spilling with bravery that sounded like fear. When you saved the book from the brazier. When you saved it, you said, what's one more sin you could... Sir Davos, the boy doesn't have a book. He has himself. And the Red Woman says, fire purifies. Mensawa. Your Grace, Davos began. The old stubborn title he gave her out of a private justice. but he swallowed it after the first word and let the rest die in the wind. "Princess, I am sworn to your father. What I stole once from a flame was a thing that did not cry out. Saving a boy is not the same as saving parchment, and I have no ship that can outrun what would follow me if I did it. There are more eyes than torches in this castle by night." She pinched her mouth closed, like the way women do when they sew, and a knot refuses to pass. "Father doesn't know what he becomes near the Red Woman. He's better when he talks to you." "He's a king," Davos said softly, "with a war on him and a god in his hall. He does not need a smuggler to tell him his heart." "But he does," she said, fierce in a small way, and the flame trembled with it, but did not fail. "Everyone does." Davos looked at the girl and thought of the sound a hammer makes when it strikes iron. Not the first ringing blow, but the one where you hear the shape begin to emerge. He touched her sleeve and then took his hand back quickly, as if even that paternal comfort were theft. "Be asleep when the dawn comes. The night is crueler when it finds children awake." She nodded once, miserly with motions lest they betray tears. He watched her retreat down the steps, her candle a piece of fallen star. When she was gone, he leaned both hands on the cold stone and pressed his palms flat. The sea murmured, and the gulls bickered in their speech that always sounded like mockery. He thought of oars creaking in quiet water, of a boy's breath in a night boat, of a lantern tied low and hooded, of a tide that would lift or betray. He saw his own hand cut free a rope, the quick soft thud of a skiff against sodden wood. He saw the Red Woman's eyes in the dark and the way fire sees back. He stayed at the parapet, and he did not go to the boathouse. In the morning, Dragonstone felt as if the island had risen closer to the sky. The sea was a sheet beaten by invisible hammers. The courtyards gathered the smell of coal, bread, and the old wet breath of stone. Davos went to the great hall when summoned and stood beneath the carved ribs that made a dragon's belly of the ceiling. The painted table, the great ancient map that was more calloused knuckle than furniture, stretched before Stannis like a stubborn patient before a surgeon. "Storms," Stannis said without looking up. He was studying the coast near Fair Isle, his lips thin with trying. "Saladhor says he cannot sail in this. He says the narrow sea is a knife turned flat." "He says many things, Your Grace," Davos said. "Most of them have prices in them." "Prices?" Stannis made the word distaste in his mouth. "He will be offered gold when I have gold. He will be offered purpose now. If he takes neither, then he may learn hunger." Melisandre stood in the hall's shadowed side, half in the light of a brazier, her hair a captured flame that had chosen a woman for its prison. She did not touch the painted table, but her eyes devoured it. "The sea is not your enemy," she said in her voice that made warmth sound like a promise only fools believed a second time. "The sea is only the road. You need the road to lead north. There is smoke in the north that will be cinders if you do not go." "But the ravens speak of wildlings," Stannis said. He did not look at her. He did not turn from the map. "They speak of the watch bled thin. The boy Lord Commander who isn't yet. I will not be accused of caring for crows, but I will not sleep while fire creeps upon a wall. Meant to guard the realm I will rule." "Then go," she murmured. "But give the road a token to hasten your tread." Davos' jaw worked of its own will. He could feel the next words as they dug roots in the soil of his mouth. But Stannis cut them with a gesture. "You spoke with my daughter," Stannis said to Davos. "The way a shipmaster notes a current he has known for hours. She thinks you can change me." "I think you can change yourself," Davos said. He set his stump against the edge of the painted table and let the pain tell him where his body ended and duty began. "I think you are the man who held storms end against a world. I think you are the man who would not feast a day while your men ate rats. I think you are the man who will not harm a boy. Thou..." Stannis did look up then, and his eyes were two chips of winter. "Kings do harm men every day, Sir Davos. They do worse than harm. They send them to die. You prefer men die as men or boys die as boys. The dead make no distinction. It is for the living to do so, and the living are fickle accountants. The boy has done nothing, Davos said. He has been born, Melisandre offered softly. That is enough to make him an instrument of either darkness or light. Would you have him serve darkness simply because he knows nothing? Them? Davos turned to her. You say the night is dark and full of terrors. I say life is dark and full of terrors. The cure for that is not burning children. Gendry is nearly a man. She said, he is strong. He is not your son. He is not the king's son. Stannis flinched like a man who feels a lash and refuses the right to cry out. He has Robert's blood. I have Robert's name. Between us we make something useful of a legacy that burned men's villages for sport. Adian Mansibiro, Dorizi. Day. Davos had faced men with swords drawn who moved slower than Melisandre did across the floor. She placed her fingertips on the edge of the map, a tenderness towards wood that Davos found obscene. There are fires that devour. There are fires that forge. You have seen both. Come to the forge, Lord of Dragonstone. Put the boy upon the anvil and see the weapon that is made. Davos closed his eyes against the enormous fatigue of a man who had climbed a hill in his soul and found the same hill beyond it. No good comes of this. A steward slipped into the hall with a bowed head and a face that had learned to live without being seen. Your Grace, he said to Stannis, the Knight of Flowers is parading through King's Landing with a new cloak. They say the Tyrells grow more dear to the boy king. There are many boy kings, Stannis said. He rubbed his thumb along the reach as if he could erase it. One sits on iron. One sits in a cell and eats my bread. There was no deliberation left. There was only an offense to be committed, and they would commit it with order, like men cleaning a blade after killing. They took Gendry to the beach when the tide had fallen far enough that the black pilings of the docks rose like teeth bitten flat. The day was raw and gray. The sky turned any man who looked up into a squinter. The men of the guard held a ring that left much space between them and the stake, sunk into the sand. That space was for the king and his red priestess, and for a few others too important to live without the knowledge of what had been done. Davos stood because he could not leave. That was the trouble with honor in petty men. It made them watch things that their betters had the strength to order with dry eyes. Gendry's wrists were bound with thick rope that had been tarred to keep the sea from eating it. He looked like the more dangerous of two prisoners, but the other prisoner was Fire, and Fire had friends in high places. He had the black hair that had sired so many bastards. He had a smith's shoulders and wrists, and a mouth that might have grown to a good laugh if given time. He looked around as if expecting the jest to reveal itself. King Stannis, he said hoarsely, as if speaking a royal name might change the shape of the moment. I didn't steal nothing. I never did. I came when I was brought. Not all thieves take from coin chests, Stannis said. He kept his voice even. His hands were clasped at the small of his back, the way they had been when he sentenced deserters. You were born into a theft. I don't know what that means, Gendry said, furious and afraid like a boy with his first hammer rash. I don't know nothing of the king. I made helmets. I made nails. Is this for nails? Then? You have more than you were meant to have, Melisandre said, stepping close as if to comfort him with a nearness that was no comfort at all. Your blood carries stories. We tell different stories with it now. She painted his brow with ash. He went still under that touch, as men always did when the first words of ritual entered their hearing, whether they believed or no. Davos had seen sailors close their eyes and feel for the shape of a prayer as a captain's voice grew a rhythm. It was the same trick. It was the very same trick, dressed grandly. The night is dark, Melisandre whispered, and the guards murmured back the answer they had learned, and full of terrors. She smiled the way a knife smiles. But we have light. She had damp wood beneath the stake and dry wood above it, the way a hearthwife lays a fire in hard weather. Oil had soaked the rope in places. A spark eats oil and does not choke even when it is given poor meat. She lifted her hands and spoke the names of shadows as if she were summoning dogs. Davos thought of Shireen's face in the stairs half dark and how her little mouth had closed on silence. He thought of a skiff he could have cut loose, and a boy who might have crouched in it like a sack of coal. He thought of the red woman's eyes catching lantern light, his shoulder bumping the coins of a bribe that burned the fingers before the purse. He thought of the taste of the sea when you put your head beneath and opened your mouth. He thought of Stannis' mouth when it tried not to be weak, and the muscles in his jaw pulled like hawsers in a gale. He did not think of his hands on ropes that would not be there, pulling a boy toward darkness to save him from another darkness. He had not done that. He had not done anything. When the flames took, they took as flames always do, with an eagerness that does not ask permission from human hearts. They sucked. They climbed. The smoke went up and blew back because the wind changed then, suddenly, as if a great thing somewhere far had exhaled. The wet sand steamed and hissed. The boy arched, the way men arch when the body remembers it once had a shape other than the one pain has given it. He cried out. He did not say a name in the cry, neither of a mother nor a god. That seemed a kind of mercy. Davos did not move. There was nothing he could do that would not be foolish, and he had always prided himself upon the few wise things he had done in a long life of shortcuts. He made himself watch until it was done because it seemed to him that to turn away before the end would make him a coward in some ledger he did not control. It did end. The smoke thinned to the smell of hot rope and charcoal, foul and ordinary. A gull skated close and veered away. The guards stood with lowered eyes. Stannis turned and walked back across the hard sand, his boots imprinting a law that the next wave would revise. Melisandre stood until the fire ate its last morsel, and then she scattered a pinch of powder and made the air gasp up a higher flame as if to say, "See, even the world agrees." They went back to the castle with the wind quartering at their backs. It was a keen wind that sliced the day into cleaner pieces. The banners that had drooped when the morning's fog had still clung now cracked sharp. The harbor that had been sulking began to wake. Men looked at the sails and found cause to swear, as they have always sworn when asked to work harder. On the painted table, Melisandre laid a hand upon the north. "Do you feel it?" she asked Stannis. And if she had asked the island, Davos would not have been surprised. "The road opens." "I feel wind," Stannis said. But there was something in his voice like a man who opens a chest and finds within it not only the expected coin, but a letter from an old friend in a hand he thought had long since forgotten him. "Send for Saladhor." Saladhor's son arrived with an expression that acknowledged both the new briskness in the flags and the old arithmetic in his soul. He came dressed like a man who sells the idea of wealth even when he is liquid at the moment only in confidence. He kissed his own fingers before making a show of considering the winds. "Ah, it seems the Lord of Light favors you, old fish. Or perhaps he favors me, because you will soon need a great many oars." "Your oars have been idle too long," Stannis said. "Idle oars rot. Idle oars drink little," Saladhor said complacently. "Idle oars do not ask for shares. Idle oars do not mutiny. But perhaps we can teach them to love this wind. It is a very fine wind." He took in the harbor with his king-bright eyes. "North," he mused. "The north is dangerous when a man wears silk under his mail." "You will not need mail," Davos said. "You will need to haul like men who carry the Lord's wrath in their backs." He did not look at Melisandre when he said it. He could feel her like heat on his cheek. The way a good stove warms a kitchen when you do not look at it, and yet you cook by its generosity. Saladhor spread his hands. "I can haul like a man who expects pay, my friend. What is the treasure you promise?" "Then, not gold," Stannis said. "Not yet. Purpose." Saladhor's smile showed white teeth, slightly uneven, as if his wealth had always come a little more easily than old laborers believed a smuggler should. "Purpose I had when I did not have 7 ships. Purpose I had when a prince's captain tried to hang me and the rope broke. Purpose I have when a girl laughs because I show her a coin and call her queen of that day. I can do without purpose. Coin sticks better to a man's ribs." "Ben, Davos, whose ribs had once known what it was to be coins, stepped forward and stepped aside for the king's pride in the same motion. "Saladhor," he said, with a kind of gentleness that a knife uses on rope, "we are not asking you to be a hero. We are asking you to take your ships with ours to a wall of ice where men fight who have no coin at all, and where the coin to be had, if there is any, is the grateful remembrance of every Southron village that will not burn next winter. There are songs that buy you better ladies than silver ever does. Bendo Island. Songs are for dead sailors. Salator said lightly, but dead sailors do not spend, so perhaps I should collect a few before I am done. He sighed, theatrical and clever. Very well. I will take your purpose, and I will take the first chest of whatever comes in its train. But let it be known that Salator-san is a pious man if ever I saw one. I will pray to your flames, Red Lady, and to the wind, and to any god who buys me rope in which there are no knots. Melisandre smiled with what she must have thought was mercy. The Lord of Light hears all prayers, she said. He answers few. Then he is like every king, Salator declared, and swept a bow so extravagant it mocked and honored in the same arc. They spent the day fitting the fleet to the new weather. Davos walked among men with tar on their hands and in their hair, and he watched them work with that particular vigor that comes upon men when fate seems to have turned its face towards them, even if the face is terrible. He checked knots. He checked inventories. He checked that the casks of fresh water had their lids sealed true. He spoke to masters of sails and to boys who would be men by the time the voyage ended, or else would not be anything at all. Sir Davos, said a voice low with shyness. The steward boy, Bran, too small for the name, held out a scrap of parchment. The princess asked me to give you this. Davos took it and saw the unsure labor of small letters marching. Shireen's lessons had become the one bright place in his long dark, and he felt a pinch at his mouth he did not allow to become a smile. He read, "Do not go to sleep when the ship is moving. It is like the bed is a cradle. People get lost when they sleep in cradles." He returned the parchment to the boy and nodded as if accepting a command from his true queen. "Tell the princess I will tie myself to the mast like a sailor who fears sirens." The boy frowned. Sirens? A kind of fish that sings. He touched the boy's head as if to pass a blessing he did not own. "Go, tell her I obey." In the afternoon, a pale sun ached out and made the water into a sullen sheet of beaten pewter. By evening, the ships nodded in their slips like horses, impatient to be ridden. On the westering edge of the day, Stannis came to the quay with a cloak thrown over his shoulders, like a sentence. He looked at his fleet, the way a mason looks at a wall, and sees not the stones, but the cracks that will come in frost. "Sir Davos," he said when the two of them stood a little apart. The harbor's noises made a low curtain around them, men cursing with affection, pulleys creaking, oars thumping as they were slotted in and tested. "You disagreed with me this morning." "I did. You would have defied me before," Stannis said without inflection. "You would have stolen a boy from my hall and dared me to punish you." Davos kept his eyes on the water. "Before, I could convince myself that a small wrong would save a greater right. Today, I could not convince myself of anything. So I did nothing." Stannis' breath made a white ghost at his lips and was taken by the new wind. "You think less of me now." "I think less of myself," Davos said, and surprised himself with the truth of it. "I have always been a man who chose among bad choices, but I could always pretend that I had a compass. Perhaps my compass was only luck and the wish to be liked by the few whose good opinion I craved. Perhaps I am not the man I thought." "Ben..." Stannis did not comfort him. Stannis did not know how and would have despised himself for the attempt. "If I win," he said, "men will forgive me anything they say. If I lose, men will condemn me for breathing. There is no wisdom to be had in the world I must make." "There is," Davos said. He let the words be like iron driven into soft earth. "You can decide what you will not do, even if it costs you." "I decided," Stannis said. "It cost me. It will cost me again. But the wind is with us." He looked to where Melisandre stood at a distance, her hair a coal that never cooled. "If the Lord of Light is a lie, he is a very profitable one. If he is not, then perhaps I will be forgiven." Davos grunted something that might have been a laugh if it had had blood in it. "Gods do not forgive," he said. "Sailors do. Sometimes." In the last of the light, the fleet slid free. Lines were cast off with quick hands. Oars dipped and took the sea. Sails took the first eager mouthfuls of wind and bellied with the relief of beasts turned loose into pasture. Dragonstone withdrew behind them with the sullen majesty of a headland that will always be there no matter how far a man runs. The stone dragons that clawed the skyline seemed to climb after the departing ships and then sank back as the hulls shouldered into open water. Davos took his place on the deck of the Fury and counted, because counting was another kind of superstition. 1, 2, 3, 10, 14. He named each ship, not with its given name, but with the men he knew to be aboard, as if that would make the sea remember their faces, as if water remembered anything but its own love for the moon. He could feel the wind singing in the rigging. It was a good wind. It felt undeserved. At full dark, the clouds thinned and showed a cold scatter of stars. The sea took on the breathless hush it sometimes does on nights, when sound hides beneath the skin of things. Davos leaned into that hush and spoke, very quietly, and not to anyone who needed to answer. "Gendry," he said, a name like a knuckle rapping at a door he had not dared to open. He waited. Nothing in the night replied. On the quarterdeck, Melisandre stood as if the wind braided itself into her hair. Stannis stood beside her, hands folded behind him, the pose of a man who holds himself still when motion would betray what he feels. Every so often, the Red Woman's lips moved. Davos wondered if she was praying or naming the shapes she saw in the air. He did not like to imagine that she could see anything. He preferred that her vision be a trick of the stout, mortal sort. Tricks at least could be matched with other tricks. By midnight, the sea showed a slightly paler line ahead, as if some enormous ghost had lain down in their path. The helmsman's head tilted. He had the sight that old sailors have, an ability to read the subtle change in the dark, the way scribes read ink. "Fog bank," he murmured. "North fog," said one of the mates. "Cold as a banker's kiss." The fog took them without the courtesy of a warning. It came like sleep at the end of a lullaby. One moment Davos could count the ship's lanterns to port and starboard. The next their lights were muffled to blurred pearls, and then masked altogether. The sea lost its horizon. The ship grew smaller, as if the world were a sleeve pulled tight around it. Men's voices came from too close or too far. Every rope was a whisper. Every whisper could be a warning. "Steady," Davos said, because Captain said that when the night did something clever, and it helped to pretend the sea had a mind that could be reasoned with. "Mind your knots. Keep a hand to the next man." He went to the rail and tasted the damp. It was not the ordinary wet of fog. It had a grit in it, a bitterness like something burned carried on water. He turned and found, without surprise, that Melisandre was near. Her eyes were very dark in the whiteness, and the fog made a ghost of the red of her dress. "The Lord sends us a road and then a veil for our enemies," she said. "All gifts, all bills come due," Davos returned. "Ask a smuggler. It is an odd trade," she said curiously, as if she were studying a specimen of fish she had never seen. "Stealing from darkness to sell to hunger. Better that than stealing from children to feed gods," Davos said softly. Her smile flickered, and then became a nothing. "You blame me for what the king did," she said, not offended. "Good. Blame is a kind of worship. You attend to me with your hate. Hate is attention refined." "I do not hate you," Davos said. It was true. He lacked the necessary heat. "I refuse you. There is a difference. Refusal is merely assent delayed." She mused. "But perhaps we may yet teach each other a new word." The fog thinned in a breath and then returned in a denser billow. In that brief clarity, Davos saw a shape in the water ahead, low and long, like a whale that had forgotten to breathe and lay just beneath the skin of the sea. Then the fog took that sight away, and it might have been nothing but a trick of his sailor's nerves. "Reef?" called the bowman, uncertain. "Chart shows none," the mate called back. Sea shows what it pleases, Davos said, easing 2 points. Gentle, gentle. The rudder answered obediently. The Fury's bulk slid in the fog as if through wool. Somewhere to port, a ship's bell rang once, then twice in quick repentance. Ropes creaked like the old knees of men in prayer. The wind that had been their boon faltered, and then came back from a slightly different quarter, as if guided by a hand that was impatient with their caution. They passed something. Davos felt it. There was a coolness at the center of the fog bank, a pocket of air that did not belong to the sea. It tasted not of salt or of smoke, but of iron and old stone, he thought, startling himself with the thought. Of a tunnel in the wall of a castle, he thought of the north, the way a southerner thinks of the north, as a large, disquieting single thing, rather than 100 small, knowable ones. He rubbed the place where his finger bones would have been if he had kept them. He found no comfort there. He had traded superstition for whatever this was, and whatever this was did not care for him. Before dawn, the fog lifted as sudden as it had fallen. Stars blinked again. The sea showed its long black plains. The shivering of every sail eased as the wind settled once more into the shape that would carry them fast. Men zagged and found their jokes, and pretended they had not lost them. Davos allowed himself to breathe fully for the first time in hours. He turned his face north where pale color had begun to unwind the night. The edge of the world there was not clean. It had a jag, a tooth, a line of white brokenness. He stared. The helmsman sucked in his breath like a faithful man who has just seen a saint's toe bone. "Is that?" the mate began, and then did not finish, because finishing would have made it real. The wall lay upon the horizon like a sleeping god's spine. Even at this distance, it was a command, not a sight. It gathered the first pearl light of morning upon its face, and gave none of it back. It swallowed the color, and made it into a wound inside itself. The ships around them adjusted their stances as men do when they enter a great hall, and feel the great hall has measured them and found them small. Stannis came to stand at Davos' side and looked as if something inside him that had been wound tight had found its purpose for being wound. "There," he said, "not triumph and not relief, and not anything a smaller man would admit to. There." The ravens were not liars, Davos said. He felt oddly grateful for ordinary corroboration in a world that had lately trafficked too much in miracles and sin. Melisandre raised her hand, palm out, in a gesture that might have been welcome or benediction or command. In the place where sky met ice, there was a flicker. It could have been the sun doing a trick with particles. It could have been a distant torch. It could have been one of those lies the eye tells the heart to keep it from drowning in simple fear. It went out. It came back. It multiplied. It made a string of fireflies at the base of the unthinkable wall. "Signals," Davos said. He sounded like a man who has described a hurricane as a large wind. "They are fighting. They are dying," Melisandre said, and there was a terrible tenderness in her voice, as if she loved the dying more than she loved the living. "But not all of them will die. Not yet." "Ain." "Bring us in," Stannis said to the helmsman. "Have the captains assemble aboard at once. We land with first light. We land where it hurts most. Send to Eastwatch. Send to any gate that will open. Sir Davos." Davos waited, the words already lined up inside him like oars that know the river without being told. "You will take the first men ashore. If there is treachery, you will see it before it sees me. If there is valor, you will find it and stand it upright. There is any hope in these men in black, you will multiply it." "Bemtrande." Davos nodded, because a nod is what a man does when the sea shows him the only channel, and it is narrow, and it will scrape his hull, and it will scrape his hull, and he prefers that to sitting with his hands in his lap until the tide goes out. "Your Grace," he said. He did not say anything about boys or fires or gods. The wind made a ribbon of the last unsaid thing inside him, and tore it loose, and it went away towards the north. He went below briefly and found his chest, and took from it the small brick of dry biscuit that Shireen had slipped there. It was wrapped in rough cloth and had a little drawing on it. A stick ship with a stick, son. He broke the biscuit in half, and ate the harder half, and put the other away. He did not know for whom he saved it. Such saving was the oldest habit he owned. When he came back up, the day had gone from pearl to the pale gray of the edge of a coin. The fleet made its line and then broke into smaller teeth. The wall grew and grew until it was not a thing one looked at, but a thing that came into one's chest through the eyes and made room for itself there by shoving other things aside. The little lights at its base were more numerous. Smoke, very thin and honest in the new wind, went up as if the morning were already full of cooking in 100 kitchens. At the last, it occurred to Davos that he had not prayed since the beach. He looked at the sky over the wall where no gods lived in the old stories he knew, and he said, very simply, if there is any mercy left in the world, find us before we are lost. The boats were lowered with squeals and thumps. The sea took them with a slap. Men clambered and swore and made humor of the cold by insulting it. Davos put his hands to a rope and felt the fibers bite. The cold made his stumps hiss. He welcomed that pain. It was clean. It belonged to him. He sat at the prow of the first boat, with the posture of a man who has learned to be ballast when ballast is needed. The ships behind them were larger than houses and heeled with the wind in a way that looked like confidence. The shore ahead was a black stroke under the white impossibility. Row, he said. The word was a gate, and men went through it. The oars went out and down, and the water took them in the rhythm that had saved and doomed men since the first plank had floated. Above, in the new day, the gulls came, laughing like courtiers. Behind, unseen but present, Dragonstone turned slowly in the minds of all who had left it. Stone dragons and salt and a day when a boy had burned and the wind had begun to blow. Ahead, where the wall shouldered the sky aside, a shape moved upon the ice like an ant upon the flank of a white bull. It was too small to belong to any world Davos had called real before now. It looked like courage or despair, or both sharing one body. The first waves broke over the bow, cold and insistent. A baptism the sea gives to everyone who enters her. Davos wiped the spray from his mouth and tasted the old salt. It was the one taste that did not lie. He set his jaw, and the oars rose and fell, towards whatever reckoning the north had conjured from blood and fire and wind. Indawanda. The boat's iron-ribbed belly slid over a thrust of gravel and came still in the hiss and drag of the backwash. Men jumped out and made the long practice of hauling, boots churning black water into a lace of spray. Beyond, the shore crouched low and stony under a sky whose light had not yet found its color. To the left, a dark stack rose where Eastwatch by the sea leaned into the ocean. Tower, palisade, the peculiar angles of timber works that had learned to live with ice. To the right, the coast curved away into a gray that suggested more gray. Everything smelled of cold, the kind that carried old smoke in it, like a memory. A line of men stood waiting where the beach stiffened into packed path. They were bundled in black cloaks, crusted pale at the seams where frost had made a habit. Their faces were a census of the realm's refuse and pride. Slashed cheek, broken nose, a gray beard that had been trimmed with a knife and not a barber's hand. The one in front had a squint that made him look as if he were trying to take the measure of the horizon and found it cheating him by a mile. "Name's Pike," he said when Davos stepped up. Voice rough as rope, but carrying easily. "Got her, Dot. I keep this end of the world from falling off." His look skipped past Davos to the other boats beating in through the commerce and to the high hull of the Fury beyond. Then it cut back. "Which of you is the king?" "He comes after," Davos said. "He likes to see if the floor bears weight before he crosses the room. That's for damned sure." Cotter Pike's mouth twitched very slightly, as if a smile had been swallowed by his beard. "You bring fire with you." His gaze slid to the woman on the second boat that had grounded behind Davos. The red hair, the unblinking placement of her stance. Pike made the thoughtful nod of a man who had watched the sea long enough to know when it refused to be salt. "You don't bring enough men." "We never do," Davos said. "How bad?" Cotter Pike spat without much bile. "Big bad. Two sorts. There's the big lot under Mance Raider that keeps lighting fires along the tree line to show us they've got more wood than sense. Giants with them. Mouths. First time I saw one of those I laughed, because it seemed a jest the world was trying on. I stopped laughing when they put tusks to timber and began to push. They'll make their big try for Castle Black as soon as they think we're busy. Then there's the little lot that keeps coming in 2s and 10s and 50s, at the places where the wall's face crumbles. If you stare at it, Eastwatch stays quiet only because the sea. Nothing likes the sea who wasn't born to it. Then we were meant to come this way, Melisandre said, stepping down with a care that made her seem more ordinary for a heartbeat, and then not. The water marked your house with its salt. The Lord of Light takes salt and smoke both. Does he? Pike said amiably. He can take our dead when they cool. Until then they're mine. He jerked his chin at the harbor. Bring your ships in under the lee of that pier. Tell them 2 pilings look sound and are rotten as a whore's promise. Tell them not to fight the current where it turns inside. Let it take the stern and kiss them into place. You can unload horses at the lower quay, not the upper. The planks crack there. Those who fall in we keep if they swim fast enough. Davos found himself liking the man without planning to. We'll not make a religion of drowning today. Good, said Cotter Pike. We've got one religion already, and it's got black cloaks. He looked again at Melisandre. Not hostile, not deferential. And what we don't have is time. By full morning, they had a rope forest at the quays, and a chaos made into order by shouting. Horses came off ships skittish and high-stepping, their breath a field of pale flowers in the cold. Sailors swore at them in 4 languages, and learned the 5th very quickly. The Lord of Dragonstance's Stormlanders looked strange among the black-cloaked men, bright shields hurriedly blanketed, lances wrapped in leather to keep them from shining, surcoats dulled with hastily smeared ash. Stannis had not come north to play at tourneys on clean grass. He had brought the men who could stand a winter wind. Even then the wind made short work of jokes. Davos went up inside Eastwatch's outer works with Cotter Pike. The gatehouse here was a stout thing with old scars. The inner yard was a place kept tidy the way a miser keeps his coins. Not a straw out of place without reason. The wall's face reared to the south like a cliff the sky had fallen in love with and decided never to leave. From this close, the ice was not clean. It had strata, a memory in lines and bubbles and beige inclusions where old earth had been taken up and made into a frozen scripture. The lift creaked and swayed, a rickety box on a string that had learned to call itself an engine because men needed the flattery. 2 black brothers in thick mitts worked the winches with the impassive endurance of men who had done the same thing every day of the last 10 winters, and would do it for the next 10 if they lived. Good wind, Cotter Pike said grudgingly to the idea of it, as if the weather were a surly hand had to shake on occasion. Got you here quicker than we'd hoped and later than we wanted. We sent to Castle Black twice. Took the birds, but birds don't open gates. He scratched at his jaw, raising a little frost of beard dust. How many men do you put in the saddle when the time comes? Enough to make a sound, Davos said. Enough to be seen. Enough to be felt. He looked at the east and west where the shore fell away and the sea pretended to be mild as a house cat. We'll not be mounting full nights in this mess. We'll ride light. It will have to be the noise that does it. Cotter Pike grunted. Noise. Noise is something. I've held lines by noise before now. That and men knowing the man next to them won't run. We've got some of that left. When Stannis came ashore, he came wrapped in plain wool, dyed a humorless brown. Silice's jewelry left where it could not glitter. There was no gold on him but his crown of iron, and he had not put that on. He climbed the ladder stairs to the inner yard with a step that could have belonged to a midshipman, each rung a thing to be taken and left behind. Melisandre moved at his shoulder like part of a fire that had been taught to walk. The Black Brothers watched them with the still appraisal of men who have buried too many friends to waste motion on curiosity. Lord Commander? Stannis said when Cotter Pike saluted in the blunt manner of a man who salutes things that have earned it. Eastwatch, Cotter said. The Lord Commanders at Castle Black are in the ground, depending how your luck ran. I'm Cotter Pike. I make sure the sea doesn't come in the windows. Cotter Pike, Stannis repeated, as if trying a coin on his tongue. You are the man they say, climbed the wall naked in a storm to win a bet. They say I climbed the wall, Cotter said. They put the naked on it later. Men like stories. I like ropes. The ropes held. So here I am. Then she. You hold your end, Stannis said. Hold it tighter. He turned to Davos. We go. We go, Davos echoed. It was not a march, as he had known marches. The world underfoot here was wrong even when it was right. The old road that ran along the base of the wall had been buried and dug out a dozen times and knew it. It rose and fell in odd humps where winter had chosen to sit more heavily one year than the next. Frost heaved stones out of the soil and laid them again at bad angles. The haunted forest to their right. Funny that a forest should need such a name, when all forests do the same work of shadowing and hiding. Watched them with the disinterest of a living thing that has seen too many caravans of human purpose pass beneath its branches. They moved light and quickly where the way allowed. Sailors became packmen. Knights became outriders without the luxury of being seen in their colors. Scouts in black moved ahead and beside and behind, sliding in and out of the trees like bits of darker night. Once, around noon of the second day, they came upon a little place that had a fence and old onion stalks standing like brittle quills in the snow. The house had fallen in a comic tilt. A child's toy, a stick with a rock tied to its end in emulation of a hammer, sat on the step, and the step was a log that had once been a tree and would be a tree next spring if given half a chance by the stubborn universe. Davos found himself standing there with the wind biting his neck and looking at the toy longer than it required. He could hear Melisandre's voice ahead calling out to scouts not in command but in prayer, naming the light as if it were a spear length away. He could feel Stannis' impatience like a heat that did not come from his red woman's god. He could taste the memory of smoke. "Sir," said a young man of the watch, knitted cap pulled low. He had the open, tired face of a boy who had expected adventure and found work instead. "You'll freeze if you stand still." Davos picked up the stick with its rock and turned it over once, respectful as if a lord's dagger. "Not much of a hammer." "Better than fingers," the boy said. His breath raveled in the air. "Name's Tuttle. I did walls in Maidenpool before I came north. Bricks don't fight back." "I like bricks." Davos gave him the stick. "Then this is yours. Meet an enemy with it and call yourself a mason, not a soldier, and see if the world blinks." "That a jest?" Tuttle asked, weary of the shape of it. "Half a one," Davos said, and that seemed to be the portion the world offered most days. They saw sign of manse raiders, far watchers before they saw the watchers. A braid of horse dung in the snow, not frozen yet. A place where a sapling had been cut at an angle that said knife, not tooth. Melisandre closed her eyes and breathed in and said, "Smoke," as if she had smelled it not with her nose but with some small hunger elsewhere in her. Davos saw the first of them not long after. A bare head rising just enough from behind a hump of snow to see, and then sinking again as if the snow had eaten it. "Tell them nothing," Stannis said to the air. "Tell them we are a rumor they will not live to prove or disprove." The third day, they reached the point where the wall and the forest drew close enough to speak in one voice. And that voice was trouble. The sky had cleared to a bright woundless blue that made the cold into a knife that did not need edges. The air snapped inside the nose. Their breath made banners and devoured them. Ahead and a little to the left, there was a darkness that was not a shadow. It moved. It was a line. It was a host. Mance had set his camp in a long scatter along the trees, where the wall's shadow fell shortest by midday. To a Southron eye, it looked like a junkyard with ideas. Hides and brush shelters, long lines of sledges, piles of firewood that were as precious as any dragon's hoard. Smoke rose in many threads, and sometimes joined into fatter ropes. There were pits here and there where men had cut peat out of the old ground. Their edges were a clean wall of black-brown that looked like cake and smelled like old swamp and fire waiting to happen. Men moved like ants in purposeful anarchy. Giants were not tales. One went by at a distance with a harness on his huge shoulders, his shag of hair under a skull of leather, and behind him a patient hairy bulk that could only be a mammoth, its breadth a field of white grass. Davos had taken ships past cities of 100,000 that smelled of fish and piss and hopes. He had seen armies gather on bright fields and name themselves Sirius because their banners were serious. This thing, this vast ignoring of rules, felt more dangerous. It had the look of a storm tide, not a bristling of spears, but a pressure. Stannis came forward on a rangy gelding the color of dirty cream. He sat the saddle as if it were a chair in a council chamber. He looked. He did not speak for a long while. He did not ask Melisandre what her flames said. He did not ask Davos for a smuggler's trick with men. He marked the lay of the ground. He marked where the trees broke in thin fingers towards the open. He marked where the snow had drifted a little lower and the ice crusted a little higher. "We come in on their right," he said finally. "We keep the trees at our shoulder until the last, and then we open like a book and show them a page of steel. The noise will do the first half. The sight will do the second. If they stand, we cut. If they run, we chase long enough to make the running a lesson." "Your Grace," Davos said, "there are giants. Then we will become a story," Stannis said. "Men like to tell stories about giants. Give them an ending they can sell a drink with." The trumpets did not sing. They barked like angry dogs. The line of mounted men that Stannis had been able to bring into this frozen edge world was not large. It did not matter. They felt like a blade light enough to handle and sharp enough to bleed. The Black brothers on foot slid out from the trees at the other side to make the noise large, their voices hoarse but high. The wildlings, strange how the word did not say what these men were. They were hardly wild, being organized by hunger and fear and leadership as tidy as any southern levy. Turning as one turns when one has been struck by a sound before a hand. Stannis' riders hit them not in their center, but where their order knotted itself around a grove of firs. A place of sledges stacked with meat and old shields cut from barrel staves. Noise did the first half. Sight did the second. Hooves made a battering that the ground would remember until spring. Men shouted things they had shouted at other men in other fields. The Red Woman's voice was in there too, a thread of smoothness through a weave of rough. Davos kept to the left with a knot of Stormlanders who had learned to ride in hills and did not panic when a root showed teeth. He had kept a sword and used it in earnest perhaps 3 times in his life in anger, and half a dozen more in practice. The blade was honest as tools go. It did the work asked and then became only weight in his hand again. He had no illusions that he was a knight at anything but in name. He knew edges, knots, timings. There was a man with a hat of foxtails whose axe came down in a sensible arc and would have done exactly what it meant if Davos had not leaned the last finger's breadth away and let the axe kiss the saddle, then gave the man a flat clip of steel where the wrist makes a foolish channel if held too high. There was another man wrapped in hulled sealskin, who had a spear tipped with bone, and the grim look of someone who thinks of his children while he kills for them. Davos' horse did the work there. Shoulder into spear, weight into bone, and the spear went away, and the man with it, and then the snow was red where it had not been a heartbeat before. The giants were as terrible and as clumsy as a man might expect. One came too near in the chaos and took a sword on the thigh the way a man takes a splinter. Furious because it stung but not enough to unman him, he swung a length of tree like a child exacting a revenge. Men went out of the saddle in ugly parabolas. The mammoth with him trumpeted, a sound that made the air seem a bell, and everything alive in it a clapper. Arrows came off the wall from far behind and above, black gnats in the bright. One rattled against Davos' helm with a tinny clink, and he laughed because fear has odd outlets. When the first shock had gone through the wildling line, and then back through itself like the backwards run of a wave over pebbles. When the first sledges caught fire, and the first pits became traps for the wrong men. When the first giant stumbled and went to one knee and could not get up under the blooming certainty of the arrows licking at him. Then the outcome wrote itself with a quick pen. Men who flee do not flee in a straight line. They run in the shapes their minds draw when this is the last drawing they will make. The forest took them by handfuls. A woman with a baby at her breast ran the wrong way and almost collided with Davos' horse. The baby's open mouth was a pale pink O of a thing still learning at the world, and the woman's eyes were 2 coins of iron that had no queen's face left on them. "Go," he said to her, because that was the one kind word he had that day. perhaps the only one he had left anywhere. She went. Someone else did not. Two men grappled near a sledge piled with hides. They could have been brothers by how their hair made the same lick over their foreheads. Davos had a moment of the old, idiotic impulse to make the world fair by deciding it was. He turned away and made himself a blind man, because there were too many visions to spend looking there. Stannis' banner. 3 heads of a red flaming heart, bright even under its ash-smeared rag, came to the fore like a liturgical object in a cruder church. His voice was not made for preaching, but it carried as far as voices can when a wind hushes to hear what men decide. "Yield," he called, a reasonable offer. "Throw down your arms. Yield and live as men live under law. Yield." Some did. Throwing down a spear is a dangerous business. You can put your foot through it at the last and lame yourself for a week. The gesture looked ridiculous, even as it meant life. But others gathered. A boil, Davos thought. Because the pressure did not just go outwards. It found a center. A man on foot with a helm, sewn with bits of copper that made it bright, turned and put a horn to his lips, and made a note that was like the cry of a hawk, and like the cough of an old man, and like a hand slapping water flat. "Mance," said Cotter Pike, appearing from the left with snow on his beard, and a nick on his cheek that dripped and smoked in the cold. Or his bones. They found the king beyond the wall, near a great raw stump, with fresh chips spattered around it, like a giant's last shaving. He was not taller than other men, and not broader. He wore a cloak of patchwork that had been many creatures, and now was a single, defiant thing. He had no crown, but the way men looked to him, crowned him, whether he would or no. He had a sword in his hand, and he had the sense not to swing it wildly. He held it point down as a man holds a truth that is of no use and all the use at once. "Stannis Baratheon," he said when the circle had made itself around them, because men always make circles for important watching. "I thought you were a story the crows told their boys to keep them from sleeping with each other." "I am a story," Stannis said. "And you're the ending of it." Mance smiled a little, and that smile had more life in it than the rest of the morning. "Stories don't end," he said. "They get told different. Will you take me with all that goes with me, King? For I'm not a single man. I am women and children and old bones that can't keep up, and men who don't like your South and never will. Or will you take my head and the heads of the ones who look like me, and pretend you have won something?" "Now, I will take your submission," Stannis answered, iron between his words. "I will take your people to my side of the wall, because all men belong to the realm I mean to rule, if they will be ruled. I will put you in irons as a traitor to the realm, and a rebel in time of war. If you kneel, I will cut those irons sooner than later. If you don't, later than sooner. But the direction doesn't change. Wench, your red woman would have me burn," Mance said, turning his head slightly to look at Melisandre where she stood with her hands quiet as a cat's. "I smell it on you." "Smoking." Melisandre's eyes did not flicker. "You have a song in you," she said, almost tender. "All men do. Some songs make light. Some songs make noise. You may yet be useful." "Useful," Mance repeated, weighing the word as a man weighs coin on a thumbnail. He looked past Stannis to Davos and cocked his head as if at a private amusement. "And you're the one who keeps his hands clean while his kings get bloody." Davos felt the words land. He had never been important enough to be seen by the people he had hurt. That was a strange privilege. "I have blood enough," he said, and Gendry's name was the part of the sentence he did not speak. Mance's mouth tipped in a way that might have been pity. "We all do, Southron. That's why the snow is never white." He knelt. He did it not gracefully. He did it as a proud man does, with the motion like a breakage in a good tool. He set his sword down with care. The noise that went through the watching ring was a creature with many throats. Sigh, laugh, curse, prayer. Stannis' face did not change. He gestured. Men came and bound Mance's hands. This last bit of practical tying, the truest of all the acts that morning. The king beyond the wall looked at the rope with unfeigned curiosity. "Good hemp," he observed. Nodded where it should be. "That's the South for you. You knot things until they forget their shapes." "Nandero." Stannis turned his horse as if ending a council. "Enough," he said. And the word made order out of the last scrim of chaos. To Castle Black. They went there not in triumph, but in an exhausted inevitability. The path along the wall grew into a road where many boots had trod, and then into a street of trampled snow, where a man could pretend he had walked a city if he lowered his eyes and looked only there. The black gate that led into Castle Black was a practical thing built by men who expected it to be battered and wanted it to survive the batter. It had survived. Its braces were scored with old nicks and new ones. The yard beyond had the tired look of a place that has just finished being a battlefield and is waiting to be an infirmary. Davos saw bodies, and he knew enough to mark what kind they were. Wildling by the sort of stitching on the coat, watchman by the way the hair had been cut. A giant lay with his eyes open, blue as broken sky, his mouth slack and the tongue black inside it. Men gave the enormous corpse the respect of passing wider than they needed to, because the size of a thing does not lose its power to frighten simply by being dead. He saw a boy with a pale, stubborn face and a dark eye that looked older than his other eye. The boy moved lightly, though he looked very tired. He wore black, and he wore no rank except what that tired eye gave him. A red burn marked his neck where a blade had kissed 2 close days or hours ago and been driven off. He stood by a stack of spears and spoke in a level tone to men who were twice his age, and listened because the tone made sense. Davos looked longer at him than he meant to because something in the boy's posture reminded him of a wind that keeps blowing in a narrow place and makes a shape of rock over 100 years that men call a statue and say a mason made. "Snow," Cotter Pike said, catching Davos' look and giving what passed for introduction when men had no time for ceremony. "Bastard of Winterfell. Keeps his head when others lose theirs. Keeps his mouth shut when fools open theirs. He'll be trouble if he lives long enough." "Bendo." "Or answer to trouble," Davos said. Jon Snow turned when the first of Stannis' men clattered into the yard, and his gaze traveled over them like a hand that was careful not to wake a sleeping child. He came forward and bowed with the stiffness of a man who does not know if he is permitted to bend in front of kings, and does it anyway, because courtesy is a better wall than pride. "Your Grace," he said, and the voice had a rasp in it that daylight had not yet had time to soften. "You found us." "I found you," Stannis said, a small concession to a boy's precision. He did not offer a smile. "The wall still stands. That is the beginning of our business. And the end, if the gods are kind," Jon said. He looked at Melisandre, and the fractional narrowing of his eyes said that he had learned to distrust even before he learned whom it was safe to distrust. "We are grateful." Melisandre smiled as if something in him had pleased her on a level that had nothing to do with gratitude. "There is much work in you," she said very softly, so that only those within arm's reach would hear. Jon's gaze went to Davos next, and in it, Davos found the thing he had expected and dreaded. The clear, unflattering mirror that the truly young sometimes unwittingly hold. "Sir," the boy said, "we heard a story you burned a boy to make the wind blow." Davos was not accustomed to strangers wanting his confession. He saw in the corner of his eye a flicker of protest begin on Melisandre's lips, as if she would chide a child for calling murder murder in a temple. He lifted his hand a little to still her, or perhaps to still something worse in himself. "I did not light the fire," he said finally. "I did not throw oil on it. I watched it burn and called that a lesser sin than stopping it with my life. You can name that what you like." Jon Snow's face did not change. "I can name it wrong," he said. There was no heat in him when he said it. There was only the truth a boy tells, when he has not yet learned the shapes that truth must be poured into. In halls where men pretend words are the same as deeds. "But I can also say thank you for being here now. Because here now keeps men alive who would be dead if you were not." He inclined his head slightly, as if absolving without forgiving. "We lost Donal Noy. The armorer. He wasn't a boy. He'd tell you were an old fool, and then pour you ale. Then I'll drink in his name and call myself what he called me, Davos said. He found that his throat hurt. He did not know if it was the cold. Stannis made counsel of a narrow room off the yard, where the air held the old flavor of boiled beef and black bread, as if it were in the timbers. The painted table had taught him to prefer maps that lied in interesting ways. The walls builders had made do with ink lines on vellum that lied in the honest way all maps do. Melisandre stood by the hearth where a grudging fire had been coaxed. She had the look of a cat that has been shown the pantry and found it bare, but promising. Cotter Pike, Bowen Marsh red-eyed with exhaustion. Othel Yarwick with sawdust pale in his beard that had not been there at dawn. Janos Slynt wearing bravado like a fresh cloak, and glancing often at a certain corner as if someone had stood there and stared him to shame. Davos took them all in and filed them by the way men do when they know they will be asked to remember on some later, colder night. We hold, Stannis said, when the mutter of greetings and rank namings had been made. We hold until I decide how to turn this victory into something larger than a day's reprieve. Mance is taken. Baden? Put him to the torch. Slynt said too quickly, his mouth moving faster than his sense. That'll teach them the taste of smoke. No, Davos said, not loud but in a tone that made a small space around the word. He had expected to keep his counsel for longer. The word had come up through him, like a fish that bites without teasing. Stannis' head turned a fraction. Permission given to speak or rebuke poised hard to tell. No, Davos said again, owning it now that it had leapt. We have burned enough boys and men on beaches and in yards and called it coin spent towards a wind. The wind is blowing. We have a door that's just cracked. We push it open with law, not smoke. Try Mance as a rebel if you must, but do it when the men who look to him have seen him alive under our order for long enough that survival begins to smell better to them than defiance. Let him send a word or two to his captains, that taste is of bread. Melisandre's eyes were hot and unreadable. Mercy breeds rot, she said. You know the smell. Mercy breeds men who owe you their children's crusts, Davos returned, stubborn even in the knowledge that he spoke against a god that rewarded stubbornness with smoke. And when you ask for those men's spears later, they will remember you did not take the one thing they could not give. Stannis stared at him a long while. It was the look of a man at a balance where the weights had been moved by an unseen thumb. You will not play the king, he said at last. I will not be ruled by pity the way other kings are ruled by flattery. No, Davos said, and found a weary grin somewhere under the frost of his beard. You'll be ruled by stubbornness, and I'll bring you the smaller weights so your scale doesn't lie to you too much. A sound came then from the doorway that was not a cough, or a sigh, or the scrape of a boot. It was the quiet clearing of a young man willing his voice to be heard. Jon Snow stood there and inclined his head a second time, as if apologizing to the notion of rank for interrupting it. If I may, he said. Stannis made a slight gesture, meaning, you may, if it costs me nothing. We have men in the woods still, Jon said. Brothers who went out and didn't come back. Some are dead and don't know it. Some are cold and can be warmed. Let me take a handful who can move fast and slip through the edge of Mance's camp while they're counting their wounded. We know the deer paths. We can bring back a few who are not yet lost. It will cost you nothing. It will buy us the only coin we mint here. Men who can hold a lion tomorrow. It will cost me men, Stannis said, unsurprised. If you're killed. You have men to spare, Jon replied, and his face did not change, though his words should have offended. And we don't. Cotter Pike made a grunt that held amusement like a small bone. He's not wrong. Davos looked at the boy and thought of the stick with the stone. Take me with you, he heard himself say, which was a strange thing to hear in his own mouth, since his place by rights was at his king's shoulder, and not in the thin dark between trees, where young men make their boasts. I know how to find lanes where men choose not to look. I've lived that way long enough. Men are sad. No, Stannis said at once, irritability hiding concern by the narrowest of veils. Sir Davos stays where I can reach him. He is my hand. The words fell into the little room and made a change in the light there. Davos had not been named thus yet. The old small title had lain between them, like a secret knife. Melisandre's eyes moved, a fraction. Jon Snow's mouth did not. Davos bowed his head because bowing was simpler than finding a way to refuse a weight he had already been carrying. "Then let the boy go and come back," Stannis said. "If you can." Jon nodded, as if given leave to breathe. "We'll bring back who we can. If not, we'll bring back the news of it." He went out and took half a dozen with him. Tuttle among them, his knitted cap pulled down like a man preparing to dive into something colder than water. Davos watched them go with a soreness under his breastbone that had nothing to do with age. "Send a man after," Stannis murmured to him, too low for the others. "Not to stop him, to count if we must." "You don't trust him," Davos said. "I trust him to do as he says," Stannis said. "I don't trust the world to oblige him. I've learned the difference." They had scarcely begun to set the next lines of their day when Selyse Baratheon arrived with a rush, like a rumor that had finally grown into a person. She had not been with the first landing. She had come in the later clutter, a retinue of sour, devout faces around her like a picket fence. Shireen was with her, cheeks reddened by wind and excitement, hair in better order than it had any right to be after the sea. The princess' eyes took all in with the hunger of a child who had found the pantry open and would eat just enough to be sick. "Stannis," Selyse said, taking the king's hand in both of hers, as if that hand were a relic that needed the right amount of piety to work its miracles. "Your purpose shines on you." "Purpose is a cold light," he said. His eyes flicked to his daughter and softened the small degree they knew. "Shireen." "Father." She said with a bob of a curtsy because there were eyes upon her and she remembered to behave. Her gaze found Davos past him, and then the curtsy became inexplicably a real thing. "Sir Davos," she said. "Is the bed a cradle?" "It rocks," he said, because now he saw the sense in the nonsense of her note. "But I tied myself." "You did not," Selyse said briskly. And the remnant of a smile went out of Shireen's mouth. "Men tie themselves to vices and call it prudence. We have no need of rope that isn't around the wrist of sin." Her look found Melisandre and bloomed into something like contentment. "Lady, all. Your light brought us here." "Newanchi." "The king brought himself," Melisandre said, which was generous or calculated. With her, Davos had ceased trying to divide those coins cleanly. Light does not row. Shireen moved to stand near the hearth and held her hands near the grudging flames. She did not look at Melisandre. She looked at the iron pot that hung there, at the way the heat made the water inside tremble. "The boy," she said very low. And it was clear which boy, for there are always 1,000 boys in a war, but there is sometimes one boy in a child's mind that the other 1,000 point at. "Did the wind truly?" "The wind truly blew," Selyse said before anyone else could find a gentler line. "The Lord rewarded faith. Your father's faith. The false king's blood was given, and the true king was carried on the road. This is the world." Shireen's eyes came up to Davos and he found himself shaking his head before he knew why he moved it. It wasn't much. It was enough that her mouth unclenched a little at the corners, as if something in her that had started to calcify had been given a little water. "He was brave," Davos said helplessly, feeling like a man who tries to patch a sail with smoke. "If that helps anything." "It never does," Shireen said with an accuracy that made him want to laugh, and then did not let him. The day lengthened into the kind of evening that has no color, only a thinning of the air's acuity. Jon Snow came back at last with 4 men and a 5th they half carried. The 5th had lost 2 fingers to frostbite that had gone past the black and into the white, and he smiled a strange little smile as if applause were due. They had found 3 dead and left them whispering under firs. "Until spring, or crows." "He's in the trees still, the big one," Jon said simply when they set their rescue down by the fire. "The one with the scar like a river, Tormund Giantsbane. If you want a man to speak for the ones who'll never kneel, he can speak. He'll come if I go to him." "Hell come with a knife," someone muttered. "Hell come with a skin of sour ale and words," Jon said, and the certainty in him was a small stubborn flame that did not so much warm a room as remind it that warmth existed somewhere. I'll go at dawn. You will go, Stannis said, surprising Davos again with that appraising fairness of his that sometimes looked like cold. You'll go with my man. Sir Davos, Melisandre said, a savor in her voice that was not hunger, not exactly. He has a way of becoming what the moment needs. I am not a chameleon, Davos said, because jokes kept men from becoming statues. I am a man with a bad luck for being the one in the room who says the thing no one likes. Bad luck turns, Stannis said dryly. You will go. You will bring this, Tormund, or you will bring back the measure of him. If he will not bend, ask him how he likes the new weight of snow when there are oaths beneath it. Then Dwa. Words, Melisandre said very softly as if to herself, watching Jon as one might watch a bird that is either a sparrow or a phoenix depending on where one chooses to stand. So many men of words at the edge of the world. They went in a gray dawn that had pebbles in it instead of snow. The forest wore the night's frost like hoarfrost in old men's beards. A woodpecker knocked at something rotten with a persistence that felt like mockery. Jon moved as if he had been born in this particular grove, and not also in some lord's warm bed. Davos moved as if he had spent his life not being seen in places where men would not look. They were good companions for a bad walk. Why did you say you watched a boy burn? Jon asked after a time in a voice that was in no hurry to judge. You could have said less. Men do. Men do, Davos agreed. But then they have to carry the weight they lied away from as well as the weight of what they did. I've not got the back for both. Who was he? Jon's eyes stayed on the path the way a knife stays in a sheath when the owner is polite. Who knows, Davos said. He had black hair and a smith's hands and a laugh that never got to be used enough. He had a father who was a king in everything but law and a mother who was a blank in the ledger. He had blood that made brave men foolish. My father? Jon asked mildly, and that word was a stone dropped into a very deep well. Another man's father, Davos said. But blood makes fools of many. It doesn't need to be your particular fool maker. He looked at the boy sidelong. You were wise to thank a man you despise for bringing help. There's not much of that kind of wisdom left. I don't despise you, Jon said. I despise easy stories. If I live long enough to be a man, perhaps I'll despise fewer things and hate them more. Try not to, Davos said. Hate takes more bread than a body should spare. Tormund Giantsbane met them exactly as Jon had said he would. On a little promontory where fallen trees had made a natural bench and the snow had been scraped back to make a raw seat. He wore the beard of 3 men and the eyes of one that had not learned to go dull, even when it would have been kind to do so. He had with him 2 ragged men and a girl of perhaps 14 with a bow that was too big for her and shoulders that were learning what too big felt like. Crow, Tormund said cheerfully, as if their last meeting had been at a feast where each had insulted the other's mother with accuracy and gotten away with it. You brought a Southron who smells of fish and smoke. You teach him to walk on the snow yet, or does he need shoes like a babe? He needs your ears, Jon said without preface. And your pride? My pride doesn't listen, Tormund said with equal honesty. My ears do. Speak. Jon spoke. He was not eloquent. He did not have to be. He said what was true. The wall would stand until it didn't. Stannis would hold until he decided to move, and when he moved, he would take those who came under his banner into the south, and those who didn't would die in drifts so honest they would be beautiful. Tormund grunted at the points that struck bone and laughed at the ones that did not, and spat at the ones that tasted of truth and ash both. You burned Mance yet? Tormund asked at last, scratching his beard as if he might find a crumb of something decent to eat in there. Or do you let him sit and think on his mistakes, the way a clever whore makes a man sit and think on his wife before she lets him in? He sits, Davos said. It's a good chair. It belongs to the king, and so it's not comfortable. Tormund barked a laugh. You have a dry look to you, fishman. I like you better than the red woman, and I like being stabbed better than I like her. All right then, I'll come and talk where your king can hear. I'll put words in the air and see whether they freeze or float. But understand this, crow and fish. These are my people. If your king means to put chains on them that are heavier than the ones cold put on them, I'll break them with my teeth and feed him the pieces. Mendero. Hell give you law, Davos said. You'll hate it as all free men do. You'll live under it as all wise men do when they have children. Tormund gave him a look that was much kinder than it had any right to be. You've got children, he said. Or had them. Had them, Davos said, and the old pain made his mouth a thin thing. Some are left. That's a blessing. Some aren't. That's the world. Men now. They brought Tormund back in the afternoon, and Stannis received him at the foot of the keep stair where men could see that he had time for this wild man, and time to hold a court of sorts at the edge of the world. Melisandre watched with a smile that made Davos wonder if she was seeing a page in her book colored in exactly as she had told a child to color it. Selisa stood near with lips pursed prim, like someone smelling mutton and wanting to call it lamb. King, Tormund said, unawed. You don't smell like a man who eats enough. Enough comes later, Stannis said. If a man eats enough today, he starves tomorrow. True, Tormund admitted. You bring law. I bring people who were never much good at law, but are very good at living anyway. Your boy with the long face tells me if we bend there will be bread. He tells me if we don't there will be snow. He says you saved the wall. I saw your horses run a good run. I don't much like being saved, but I like my people not dying more than I like not being saved. So, I'll bend this much. We go through your gate. We stack our spears where you say. We keep our knives because no man gives his last thing and lives. You keep your red woman away from our babies. You try burn a child, and we'll cut the ropes you hang us with, and strangle you in the twitch of them. None. Accepted, Stannis said at once, to the surprise of men who thought him incapable of soft answers. Knives are allowed. Babies are not burned. Law is kept. Oaths are sworn. You answer to me through the men of the Night's Watch until I appoint a man to answer for me. You will not raid south of the wall. You will pay with timber and work what you cannot pay with coin. You will send your strongest sons to learn the sword as my men learn it, and your cleverest daughters to learn the reckoning of stores as my stewards reckon. And Tormund scratched again, thoughtful. You aim to make our girls clever. That's a dangerous thing. It is, Stannis said. Dangerous to fools. The bargain was not made in a letter. It was made in smoke of breath and smell of horse and the hiss of a rope, when men pull it through cold hands too fast. Jon Snow stood to the side and said nothing as if the saying had been done. Davos watched the thing happen that he had wanted to happen and found no joy in it, which was the way of things done because they must be done, not because they are right. That night, when the camp was a city of shivering tents and pools of lantern light that looked warm until one stood in them, Davos walked the perimeter of what men had drawn and called safety. The stars were as thick as the words of a drunken man, and as comprehensible. He felt his years in his knees. He felt his sins the way sailors feel the weight of a remembered storm in their shoulders when the wind is too quiet. Shireen found him near the place where the mammoth's body lay under a thin drift already that would be a hill by morning. She should have been in her blankets. She had the way of a child of slipping the watch of maids and finding the one man who would not bring her back too quickly. Her cheeks were reddened, and the patch on her face was the same as ever. The story the illness had written there in the unreadable script that needed no reading to be known. Sir Davos. She said, and took his hand without ceremony, as if she were the older. Will the wind blow us home soon? It blows us toward the next thing, he said. Home is what men call a place they will leave again, when someone reminds them who they are. Who am I? Shireen asked. You are a girl who knows the names of things, Davos said promptly. That will keep you alive, if you learn which things don't care. Does the Red Woman care? Shireen asked, quick and sudden as a fish taking a fly. She cares for the fire, Davos said, and his breath smoked like a confession. She thinks the fire cares for her. Fire doesn't care, Shireen said, with the same crisp accuracy she had given him earlier. Fire eats. They stood together looking at the corpse of a creature that had walked in stories and lay now in the rarely honest equality of the world's cold. Far off, someone sang low and ragged, a wildling song full of verses about little things. Shoes that keep out water, bones that don't ache when it rains, that the South's minstrels never bothered with because they sold fewer cups of wine. "The king will send you away," Shireen said after a bit. "He always does, when he needs something said to someone who doesn't want to hear it." "I'm good at wearing words like old boots," Davos said. He felt old. He felt exactly old enough. And who would I say them to? "I don't know," Shireen admitted. "But I will know when you've gone. There is always a shape where you stood. Like when a chair is pulled back from a table, and there's a little dust that hasn't settled yet." He laughed then, because the image delighted him, and hurt him as good true things do. "If I go," he said, which was a way to make the promise gentle. He did go. Days later, when Stannis' mind had begun to lean forward again, the way it always did after the first hammer blow of an action had fallen. The king wanted the north, and he knew he could not have it by standing still under a wall that belonged to no one. Letters had been sent to great houses that had heard too many letters in the last few years to be moved by single inked lines. Some had answered with scorn, some with silence. One answer had come from White Harbor, courteous and fat, with words and empty of the one word that mattered. "Yes. Go to Lord Manderley," Stannis said, in the little room that had been made to accommodate the idea of a king. "Tell him his loyalty is owed, and the time to pay it is now. Tell him that I will take his pledges or his head for a traitor. Tell him that I know a Stark boy still lives. Tell him that I will have the North ordered again, and his ships will fill with real cargo, not the smoke he's been selling his people to make them pretend they eat food." "Shall I tell him all in one breath?" Davos said, not mocking, and not entirely grave. "Or shall I spread the words out over his table like coins until he picks them up?" "Spread them," Stannis said, with the patience he only ever showed to the things that could not be hurried. "You are better at that than I am, but remember the last coin. Show it to him, even if you do not drop it." "The last coin?" Davos asked, though he knew. "His head," Stannis said. And then it was a council again, and not a conversation between two men who had needed each other longer than either liked. Melisandre did not protest. She came to Davos after and laid a hand on his sleeve as a woman might lay a hand on a lover. "The fat man will try to swallow you," she said, amused. "He will talk of pies while he eats your time. Let him. Time belongs to the Lord. Men only rent it, but keep a finger on your own pulse while he speaks. If it goes odd, you lie." "I always lie a little," Davos said, "and tell the truth with the lies. It's a smuggler's way." She tilted her head. "One day your honesty will be as dangerous to you as any blade. I will be there to see if your light goes out with a hiss or a sigh. Then?" "May it be a sigh," Davos said. "I want the indulgence." He went down to the harbor that had become a nest of patched ropes and new purposes. The Fury rode in the lee, with the sullenness of a ship that had worked too hard and wanted to be a house for once. Saladhor Saan sat upon a coil that had seen better days and tossed a coin in the air and caught it without looking, the way men catch news they have been waiting for, and pretend they are indifferent to. "My hand?" the Lysini called lazily when Davos boots made the plank talk. "Have you come to pay me at last? Or do you bring me something better than pay? A story with a belly full of profit?" "White Harbor," Davos said, and the coin made a pleased little chink, which was either expert flick of wrist or the sound story makes when it sees a purse. "Big city," Saladhor mused. "Big bellies. Big beds. Big men with small souls. I like White Harbor. The ladies there laugh at my jokes even when they don't understand them. And the lords understand my jokes even when I don't make them." He hopped down with the grace of a cat. "We'll take you. You'll talk to the fat lord and he'll tell you he loves you more than his own sons, and then he'll let you go out his back door with a pie in your hand and a knife in your back if you don't watch him." He clapped Davos on the shoulder with genuine affection under the show. "Don't watch him. Watch his cooks." "I'll watch the crumbs," Davos said. "They fall the right way if a man cuts the pie honestly." "Nothing about pies is honest," Saladhor declared with cheerful blasphemy. "That's why we loved them. The sea that took them down the coast had not forgiven them for being a road the week before. It made them work for every league in a fretful cross-chop that nipped at the bow, and then slapped the quarter as if it had changed its mind after the first insult and wanted another angle. Clouds lay like old scars along the horizon. The cold got into knuckles with a persistence that made old men remember arithmetic. On the second night out, when the crew had found their rhythm of cursing, and the watch had begun to pretend it was content to be walked, Davos stood by the rail with his hands in his sleeves and let the fury do her small dance under him. He had not slept long for weeks. Sleep pawed at him, and he gave it crusts but not loaves. The stars were stingy. The sea had that property it sometimes did, of seeming to be one thing for hours, and then, without moving, being another. A cloud moved and showed a patch of sky, and then covered it. He felt the old ache in his missing fingers, ghosts talking. He did not listen. He said the boy's name once, to the air that had no ears. Gendry. Not a prayer. Prayers are bargains by another name, and he had made too many bargains that had been paid in counterfeit. Just a naming. The wind took the name and did with it what wind does with names. Made no promises. White Harbor rose out of the morning like a thing too big to move, and too stubborn not to. Its towers had their own dialect of gray. The great merman's court with its bronze doors looked like a boast a man might learn to love in time. The ships in the harbor wore fatter bellies than the East had. Grain makes a ship keep her shoulders higher than silk does. The smell was fish and river mud, and a quality of generosity that cities that have kept their confidence have, and those that have been ashamed lose and never get back. Wyman Manderley. Saladhor said, savoring the name like a sweet. He is a man who thinks in pies and laws and old songs. He'll tell you he's too loyal to live, and then he'll live anyway and make loyalty out of the living. Be careful in there, my hand. Men drown in courses when the plates are silver. I've eaten off worse, Davos said. But he smoothed his hair with water anyway. An old habit that felt like respect and pretense both. They brought him ashore in a boat with a carved merman on its prow, whose face seemed eager to laugh at private jokes. The quayside made the right noises. The men who met him had the right hats, tall and foolish, the debt collectors of ceremony. The Lord Steward was a man with the kind of eyes that count even while they bow. He made Davos welcome with a length of words that would have wrapped a small package twice and tied it neat. By the time Davos stood under the painted ceiling of the merman's court, his patience had been made sharp by the whetstone of politeness. Wyman Manderley came and carried more upon his knees than his feet. His body a treasury of every indulgence a long peace could be convinced to justify. His face was cleverer than his girth allowed strangers to credit. He had the small hands of a man who likes the work of writing, and the large mood of a man who likes the work of eating. He smiled, as if the world had not been cruel this morning, and if it had been, as if he had shamed it for trying. Sir Davos Seaworth, he boomed, voice amiable and too loud by half, which meant he liked to hear it, and liked others to know he liked it. I have wanted to meet you since before I knew I wanted to meet you. Come eat. I find that men speak more honestly when their mouths are full and their bellies are warmed. If you will forgive me the impertinence, I have had a pie made. Nah. I forgive anything that comes with crust, Davos said, and the laughter that went around the hall was the good kind. Men amused and made more friendly by the ease of it. The pie was magnificent. It had fish and bacon and onions, and something sweet at the edges that teased memory and would not explain itself. Davos ate with a workman's attention and did not let his eyes get drunk with the bright silver or the tapestry that showed mermen rescuing sailors who did not deserve it. When Wyman had seen him eat enough to think him company and not beggar, he leaned back and patted his middle with a seriousness that would have been comical if it had not been so comfortable. So, Wyman said, and the word floated up on a tide of gravied contentment. To what do I owe the honor? Duty, Davos said. He could not dress the word better. Your king calls. He saved the wall. He will save the realm. He asks you to stand. Wyman dabbed his lips with a napkin that could have clothed 2 children. Which king? The one who came, Davos said. The one who put men where they were needed, instead of words where they were pretty. Stannis Baratheon. Oh, him, Wyman said, as if Davos had named a fishmonger who had once shorted him on a measure, and then made up for it by sending a basket of eels to his kitchen. He is a stern man. The North respects sternness. It also respects wintering. We have had to winter our hearts as well as our fields. Many have come and called themselves king. They all had banners. He has more than a banner, Davos said. He has a claim and a deed, and the sense to see that if you do not fill the bellies of children, they will grow up to empty your vaults with knives instead of words. He is not lovely. He is necessary. Wyman's eyes hooded slightly. Necessary men are dangerous. They cut through rooms where delicate things are kept and do not see the broken glass until later. You ask me to break my peace. My peace is not jolly feasting alone, Sir Davos. It is that my people eat more days than they daunt. It is that my docks ring with hammers. It is that I can make pies instead of coffins. And now, you ask me to tell my king I found a man too fond of pies to chew his duty, Davos said. Geniality, a fitted coat over iron. I ask you to tell your king that the North has been made a slaughterhouse, Wyman said. And his voice went soft, and in its softness was a remembered bleakness that had not been fed to death. That phrase in Bolton's have called wolves dogs and sent them to heel and made collars of children's hair. That if we bend to a man who cannot protect the small, then we may as well serve the cook who salts our soup efficiently. You ask for banners. I ask for a Stark. Benderowell. Davos could have lied then. He could have said that a Stark boy stood behind him in the hall waiting to wag a tail made of old swords. He did not. There is a boy, he said. Not dead. Lost. Manderley, you have ships. You have men with ears in alleys. I have a name the wind whispered to me when it thought no one listened, and the name is a place where wolves may be cubs in secret. Skagos. Wyman's eyes came alive like coals under the stir of a bellows. His hand tightened on the arm of his chair, and the wood creaked like a ship. You have boldness, he said, and the compliment was almost a caress. And you have luck, fishman. Do you know what happens to men who seek east of east, north of north? Some freeze, Davos said. Some come back with stories that sell them more beer than their grandchildren will drink. Some find what they were sent to find. Do you think you are the third kind of man? Wyman asked, curious as if he were choosing between desserts. I think I am the kind that does what his king asks when it is the right thing, Davos said. And for once, it is the right thing. Bring me a ship that can live in bad water and men who have no more pride than they need. I will bring you a boy if there is a boy to bring. Now. And if there is no boy, then I will bring you the truth so you can decide whose pies to bake and whose to throw away. Wyman Manderley closed his eyes a moment, perhaps to count, and perhaps to remember. When he opened them, he was smiling again. A man returned to the room where guests waited, his private math done for now. He ate more pie, he said. Then we will talk to my captains. Then we will see if the sea is in a mood to be used for more than looking at. Bendero. He ate. He talked. He did not yet sail because men do not sail on speeches. He went back to the Fury with clotted cream in his beard, because Saladhor mocked him less when there was something to point at. On the quay, a boy ran between legs with 2 loaves under his arm, and someone shouted and did not run fast enough to catch him. The sun was a pale coin flipped by a lazy god. On the 3rd night in White Harbor, Davos woke to the sound of bells speaking wrong. City bells tell the truth most days. Fire, flood, feast, birth of a lord, death of a fishery. These bells said something that had no place in a city that thought itself safe. Men came out into the streets in nightclothes with their hair telling on them. Faces turned toward the sea, because in White Harbor, all trouble wears water somewhere on it. Davos went to the tower where the harbor was watched and mounted the steps with a speed that made his breath bite his lungs. The keeper with a cap too large for him pointed with a shaking arm. Look, he said, as if the word would steady his hand. Out beyond the last bobbing line of masts, the sea had taken on a color like old bruises. The horizon, which had seemed to be lying for a week by pretending to be a straight thing, bunched. Lights moved there in a way lights did not move. Davos narrowed his eyes until the lights made more sense. They were lanterns. Many. A scatter like stars poured from a broken basket. Ships, whispered the keeper. But not ours. Not ours, Davos agreed, because he felt the shape of the hulls, the way a man feels the shape of a word in his mouth before he says it. Longships. Many. Oars in banks that flash when they lift and do not flash when they fall. Figureheads that have not been taught to be polite. The sea cracked its knuckles softly along the piers. The dark grew teeth. Far out, a horn blew a note that was a laugh without humor. Saladhor's coin flicked and did not come down. Wyman Manderley's eyes, far away behind thick lids in a bed too warm, would be opening with the swiftness of a man who loves peace and knows war when it knocks like a cousin who's been drinking. Davos' hand went to the small pouch at his neck, out of old habit, found it empty, and closed anyway. The wind freshened as if it had been summoned by the kind of prayer men do not put into words. "Wake the city," Davos said, gentle and implacable. The way one speaks to a tide that must be worked with and not shouted down. "Wake the fat lord and his thin captains. Tell them the harbor has visitors that do not wait to be announced." He could not see his king. He could not see the wall. He could see only this water, these lights, this wrong moment. He felt the old engine in himself turn over as it had 100 times. Rope. Oar. Tide. Man. He did not consider whether this intrusion was mischance or design, whether some letter sent by some small spite had found an ear that loved mischief. He did not think of the boy at the wall who had called what he had done wrong and said, "Thank you anyway." He thought of work. The first of the longships slid in with the insolent grace of wolves, slipping into a fold. Their oars took and gave, took and gave. Men on the bows wore iron shaped like men who had been born to iron, gray, hard and convinced. Someone laughed again, closer now. And the laugh was the same as the horns. A grapnel went out. It caught. It bit wood. The wood screamed, the way wood does, when it is made to remember it is tree. "Up," Davos said again into the night that was about to become morning whether it wished it or no. Bells spoke. Doors opened. Men shouted in 3 dialects. White Harbor drew itself up, fat, clever, unashamed, and showed its teeth. The sea, good traitor that it is, offered itself to both sides with equal fervor. Davos Seaworth, smuggler, knight, hand, sinner, saint to a few starving men, and devil to a dead boy whose ashes had been kicked by a gull, stepped into the space where men earn the names others give them, and do not learn them until later, if at all. The oars rose. The oars fell. The first arrow whispered. The first man screamed as if to teach the others how. The wind, which listens only to itself, went on about its business.